So, by now, I'm pretty sure it's obvious that I love indie games and platformers and Nintendo and all that jazz, but a lot of my favorite games don't fall into any of those categories. I have this deep-seated love for cinematic experiences. You know the ones, usually AAA games like Detroit Become Human, Uncharted, The Last of Us. Cinematic games come in all shapes and sizes, sure. Sometimes they're structured like choose-your-own-adventure novels. Sometimes they're grand open-world adventures. And sometimes they just set you on a linear path and let you experience a story like a movie, but with more interactivity. Anyway, I'm a big fan of games, I'm a big fan of movies. It should kind of go without saying that I'm a big fan of cinematic games, hence The Last of Us. A cinematic action-adventure game released in 2013 by Naughty Dog. I'm sure by now that everyone is familiar with them. They're the people behind The Last of Us and Uncharted. But back in the day, they were also behind one of the very first games I ever played, and one of the reasons why I ended up studying game development in university. I'll save the Crash talk for another day, but if you want to hear more about Naughty Dog's other work, leave a comment down below. It really does help. The Last of Us is one of the most highly celebrated games on the PS3, cementing itself as the 7th highest rated PS3 game on Metacritic. Upon its release, it won enough awards to warrant an entire Wikipedia page dedicated solely to its accolades. Keep in mind, this was only 5 months before the release of the PS4. Only 8 months after that, the game would receive a whole new remastered release, which ranked even better, currently sitting cozy at the 4th highest ranking PS4 game ever, also on Metacritic. I played the remastered version on the base model PS4, so that's where my footage comes from today. Also, I'm about to get into some lore and story setup, including the beginning of the game, so no major spoilers yet, but if you want to avoid minor spoilers too, you can skip to this timestamp, or just come back when you've played the game. Alright, let's get into it. Aside from the game's prologue, The Last of Us, like many games from the late 2000s and early 2010s, takes place during a zombie outbreak. What makes this one unique is that it's not just some T-virus, Moscovium, mad cow disease, angry viral zombie outbreak. This one is fungal. It's caused by something called cordyceps, a type of parasitic fungus that infects the brain and takes control of the host's body, something that actually happens in the real world. Not to worry though, this doesn't happen to humans. It's actually most common in ants and other insects. The fungus infects the ants and compels them to climb up high to a place with ideal conditions for it to grow, reproduce, and release its spores in order to infect more ants. And unlike in the game, it actually never touches the brain. Which actually kind of implies that when the fungus takes over somebody in the game, that person is still stuck inside somewhere. It's a bit, terrifying. But in the world of The Last of Us, a cordyceps fungus mutated and gained the ability to infect humans, resulting in the death or infection of about 60% of the human species. It spreads similarly to real cordyceps in that it'll destroy their body in order to grow and release spores to infect more hosts. Of course, it also comes with the added caveat of spreading through bites, because after all, can you really call it a zombie apocalypse if the infection doesn't spread through bites? These events begin in the year 2013. Our protagonist Joel arrives home late one day after a rough day at work. It's his birthday, and his daughter Sarah has been waiting for him to come home so she can give him a present. They have a very sweet exchange before heading to bed for the night. However, they don't get to sleep long before shit hits the fan and panic breaks out in the streets as the infection reaches their home in Austin, Texas. Joel and Sarah, along with Joel's brother Tommy, attempt to leave the city as quickly as possible, but soon become separated. This is when Joel and Sarah are stopped by a soldier. It quickly becomes apparent that he's been ordered to kill anyone who tries to pass through, and he opens fire. Tommy catches up and puts a swift end to the soldier, but at this point, it's already too late. Joel is fine, but Sarah has been shot. And she dies in her father's arms.
Baby! Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. No.
This is one of the most tragic, heartbreaking scenes in any game I have ever played. It beats out most movies in how well the emotion is portrayed. Joel's performance is visceral. I don't remember having cried at any video game before this one, but when I played The Last of Us for the first time, I wept, and this is just the prologue. This heart-wrenching scene sets up a game about tragic circumstance, a story that encompasses so much hardship, grief, and loss, constant themes throughout the experience. The prologue for The Last of Us primes us for an emotional story, a tragedy, something unlike what most video games offer. This isn't just another adventure. We're not raiding tombs or slaying hordes of bad guys. We're just coping, trying to survive in a world that just won't stop turning. The rest of our story takes place 20 years later. Joel has been surviving as a smuggler in a quarantine zone in Boston, Massachusetts. He and his partner Tess have recently been shortchanged in a weapons deal and go looking for their client in order to get him to pay up. But turns out, he's already sold the weapons he owed them to the Fireflies, an independent militia group who are revolting against military oppression in quarantine zones. Luckily for them, the Fireflies offer the weapons and then some if they escort 14-year-old Ellie to a Firefly rendezvous just outside the city. However, the deal goes awry. Tess gets infected, and Joel and Ellie are tasked with trekking across the country on their own in search of the Fireflies. The story is told mainly through cutscenes and ambient dialogue, with a much heavier weight placed on the former. If you've ever played The Last of Us or Uncharted before, then you're probably aware that Naughty Dog is extremely good at this kind of storytelling. These games absolutely succeed at delivering a cinematic experience. They play out much like you'd expect of your favorite movie or TV show, and surprisingly enough, are actually marketed that way. There's this one advertisement for Uncharted 2 that's been living in my head rent-free since 2009.
Dear PlayStation, I've been playing Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, but my girlfriend won't stop watching because she thinks it's a movie.
Yeah, so basically this guy's girlfriend thinks that Uncharted is a movie, and the PlayStation rep guy encourages him to gaslight her. No big deal?
Yeah, I'm gonna file this under not an issue.
Anyway, it's really stupid, but the point is, the people behind these games know exactly what they're doing, and I think they'd be right to market The Last of Us in the same way. There is a lot to be loved about this game, but the way the story unfolds and the manner in which it's told is one of its greatest strengths. Not only that, but the game tells more than just the story of Joel and Ellie. It also tells the story of the world in general and the people who live in it. Every environment that you find yourself in, whether you're crawling through abandoned homes or offices, or dredging through the sewers, these places existed before you arrived and will continue to exist long after you leave. People have lived in these places, animals make them their homes, and they all have a story. Whether it be through reading notes scattered across the environment or objects, bodies, writing on the wall, there is a lot to be uncovered. You get to learn about the tragic fates of those who made these places their home, and sometimes their story can be as heartbreaking or worse than Joel and Ellie's. The world is a dark place in The Last of Us, and you can see that everywhere you go. Never mind that the trend for games that released in the early 2010s was to have dark, gritty, and desaturated visuals. The world itself, the tragedy that its inhabitants have suffered through, it plays a major role in how these places feel, and how the game feels as an experience. But even so, with all the loss that the world has suffered, there are brief moments of color. Like a breath of fresh air, a short respite from the grief that has plagued humanity as a whole. The world keeps turning, and where you may not expect to find life, it goes on. What's also really nice about the environments in this game is how they're complemented by the gameplay. The Last of Us takes a lot of influence from horror games of days past, mainly games like Resident Evil, where a lot of the tension is driven by a lack of resources. Joel and Ellie are trekking across the country on foot, so their capacity to bring equipment around with them is fairly limited. You'll never be so overburdened with weapons and ammo that the fear of running out goes away completely, but you will have to do at least a little bit of exploration if you plan on using your weapons. This focus on inventory management encourages you to really discover everything a given environment has to offer, leading you to find things like notes left behind by previous inhabitants and learn all about the great, compelling stories the world has to offer. In addition to lore and ammunition, this is also how you'll find things like supplements, parts, and tools, which can all be spent on new abilities and upgrades for Joel and his weapons. The skill trees in The Last of Us are extremely basic, mostly just providing stat bonuses for weapons or abilities of your choice. But since the things you need to get those bonuses are hidden throughout the environment, it really incentivizes you to explore every nook and cranny. I'm the type of person who will explore everything just for the little pieces of lore you can find, but even if you don't already need the extra incentive, it's so satisfying when you stumble upon something you can use to give yourself a permanent upgrade. I also find it fascinating how they don't tie your character progression to the actions you take in combat or your progression through the story. It's super unique and actually acts as an incentive to mix up your playstyle. If they had done what most games do and tie your character progression to the amount of enemies killed or story milestones achieved, you likely wouldn't experience nearly as much of the environments or world building in the game. Plus, there's always a chance that most players would run into every encounter guns a-blazing. Plus, this focus on exploration and incentive to do so really helps out with the difficulty of the game in the inventory management side of things. You'll be finding more than enough crafting materials if you take the time to look around, so you'll never be running out of shivs or bombs for when you do need them, opening the doors to more varied strategies in combat and stealth encounters. You see, although a lot of this game has you exploring dilapidated buildings or getting in shootouts with unsavory individuals, it's also a stealth game at heart. You'll often find yourself in dank corners of the world, having to find your way through groups of infected. You can absolutely engage them in combat, but if you do, chances are you're going to start running out of ammo really fast. Instead, you're going to want to take your time and get creative with your strategy, using everything at Joel's disposal to distract the infected and pass through undetected. Remember how I said the zombies in The Last of Us are way different from zombies in most games? Well, almost all of your encounters with them are going to be stealth-based, not combat. When the cordyceps fungus infects someone, the first thing it attacks is their eyes, so you end up with these really visually unique zombies with big mushrooms sprouting from their faces called clickers, because they make clicking sounds as a form of echolocation. Most of the time, when you happen upon zombies, there will be a mix of clickers and what are called runners, which aren't as strong as clickers but maintain some of their eyesight, making them harder to sneak past without alerting all of the other infected in the area. They both offer their own challenges, with runners sort of acting like any other survivor in that you can choke them out and defend yourself if they attack you. But with clickers, you have to be extra careful not to get caught, because the only real way to defend yourself against them when they get too close is with a shiv. So always keep your shivs stocked up, I guess? There are two other types of infected that you can find in the game as well, which are more aggressive. The first being stalkers, which are kind of anti-stealth in that they sneak up on you. These guys only show up in the game a total of 2 times, and as a result, I didn't remember them at all. I double-checked zombie types on the fandom wiki when writing this video and then ended up having to scrub through hours of footage to find where they actually showed up. I honestly thought these guys were just some sort of souped-up runners or something, and that I was just not playing those encounters very well because of how many times I died when I was treating them like the other zombies. But apparently they're their own separate thing. I don't know, maybe the second game will use them more frequently or in more interesting ways, but I'm not kidding when I say they almost didn't make it into the script. The other infected are called bloaters because they're big and bloated. They kind of act as the boss monsters of the game, sort of like a big punctuation point at the end of a big chapter or at the climax of any given point of the story. From this point forward, I will be jumping into the heavy spoilers of the game, so if you haven't played The Last of Us yet, you can still check out my conclusion. It's timestamped below and marked in the timeline, but either way, I recommend giving the game a playthrough before checking out the next part of this video. In the typical zombie apocalypse game, themes tend to revolve around survivorship, mental health, or the cruelty of humanity. But what makes The Last of Us unique is its focus on Joel and Ellie's relationship. It turns out Ellie has been bitten by an infected 3 weeks ago and should have turned by now. The Fireflies believe she must be immune to the cordyceps fungus and want to use her to create a vaccine. Thus, Joel and Ellie's relationship begins as something vaguely comparable to a working relationship. They're working together to bring Ellie to the Fireflies safely to create a cure and save humanity. This is nothing more than a job, and Ellie is nothing more than precious cargo that needs protecting. The pair set out to find Joel's brother Tommy, who happens to be a former Firefly, in hopes that he may know where they need to go. Along the way, they quickly grow fond of each other, and their relationship develops into more of a family dynamic. But after getting separated in an abandoned hotel, Ellie comes to Joel's rescue by shooting an attacker. Until now, Joel had been against giving Ellie a gun, likely fearing it would expose her to more dangerous situations. He recognizes that Ellie is more than capable of wielding a gun, but he also fears that it would deprive her of her innocence. Despite his fears of Ellie being forced to grow up too fast, he entrusts her with a rifle. On the way out of the city, Joel and Ellie meet Henry and Sam, who are also looking for an escape. United by this common goal, these are the only people Joel and Ellie have met in a long time that they can relate to. Especially Ellie, who hasn't had someone her own age to interact with in who knows how long. Unfortunately, and unbeknownst to the others, Sam is bitten by an infected and turns. Henry is forced to pull the trigger on his own brother. Devastated by the events that have just unfolded, he turns the gun on himself, leaving the two on their own once again. Later in the fall, they meet up with Tommy, who is heading a group of survivors that are attempting to restart a power plant in Jackson County. Joel asks to entrust Ellie with him, hoping Tommy can safely deliver her to where she needs to go. But when raiders attack the power plant, Ellie steals a horse and runs away. Joel and Tommy are able to track her down, but when they do, Ellie speaks up about how she doesn't want Joel to leave her like everyone else seems to. Joel is more concerned about her safety and trusts Tommy to take better care of her than he can, and the discourse ends with Joel stating,
You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad. And we are going our separate ways.
By the time they escape the raiders, Joel has a change of heart and recognizes how much it means to Ellie that they stay together, and they don't go their separate ways. Instead, heading to the University of Eastern Colorado, which is where Tommy believes the Fireflies to be operating. Unfortunately, it turns out that the Fireflies are no longer there, and Joel gets gravely injured in their attempt to escape some looters which have taken up residence there. Oh, it's the cutest thing I've ever seen. Ellie is now tasked with taking care of Joel, but his wound has gotten infected. Luckily for her, she meets some suspicious individuals who offer to trade her antibiotics in exchange for a deer she just killed. She returns home and administers the medicine in time to realize they tracked her back to Joel. In an attempt to mislead them, she hops on the horse and rides away before getting captured. This is when Joel wakes up and takes hostages of his own, brutally torturing the men for information on Ellie's whereabouts before killing each of them. Meanwhile, Ellie is able to escape the clutches of these nasty cannibals and brutally slaughters their leader. Joel pulls her away from the body, and the two are reunited. In the spring, Ellie and Joel finally reach Salt Lake City, which is where the Fireflies are currently operating. On their way to the hospital, they find a herd of giraffes, serving as a contrast between the beauty of nature and the horrors of the infected and mankind, providing a sign of hope for Ellie. On their way to the hospital that the Fireflies are operating out of, Joel and Ellie fall into a flooded tunnel, after which Ellie is unconscious, and Joel desperately performs CPR. This is when the Fireflies show up and knock Joel out before bringing them both to the hospital. However, after arriving at the hospital, Joel is told that the procedure necessary to create the vaccine will result in Ellie's death. By now, he very much thinks of Ellie as his daughter, and having not been able to save Sarah, he can't allow this to happen. After all, what is it worth saving humanity if he has to go through hell again? Joel breaks his way into the operating room and brings Ellie back home, killing many of the Fireflies and their leader in the process. He tells Ellie that they had found many other people who were immune to the infection, and that they had stopped looking for a cure. However, upon reaching Tommy's settlement, Ellie confronts Joel and asks if what he said about the Fireflies is true, to which he says,
I swear.
Okay.
There's a lot of ambiguity left by this ending, mostly regarding whether or not Ellie believes Joel. I personally don't think she does. At the end of the day, Ellie trusts Joel. Their relationship has grown so strong over the course of the game, and by now, she just takes his word. Deep down, I'm sure she knows that Joel would have done everything in his power to protect her. Whether he made the right decision is up for debate, but he, and the rest of the world for that matter, now need to live with the choice he's made. I love the ambiguity of this ending, though I'm sure a lot of people feel really unsatisfied by it. It leaves us with a lot of questions and forces us to think about what we've just played. Ellie's feelings may be up for debate, but I feel as though the big question of whether or not she believes Joel is answered by her expression and character development. Joel and Ellie just spent an entire year fighting for each other's survival, and I honestly can't see an ending for their story that doesn't play out like the one we just saw. But that's about it for the story. For anyone who skipped ahead, it's safe now. No more spoilers, I promise. The Last of Us is an amazing game, one of my absolute favorites. Everything about it plays so well with each other, and every pillar of its gameplay experience supports each other in a massive way. The gameplay and inventory management is supported by exploration, which in turn also supports the story and world building, and vice versa. The story is incredibly well told, and holds up when compared to my favorite movies and TV shows. It's emotional, and served as the first game to prove to me that games can tell that sort of story, that they can evoke emotion and make you feel things. It's rare to find any story that explores its characters and their relationships as thoroughly as The Last of Us explores Joel and Ellie. In zombie fiction, you often see characters having to choose between killing their friends or watching them turn, causing them to suffer and possibly hurt more of the people they care about. But the choices the characters in The Last of Us face are much more complex, and the decisions they make are all informed by the development of their characters throughout the story. There's an ambiguity left behind by these dilemmas, and as an audience, we can't point at the screen and yell at the characters for making the wrong decisions, because at the end of the day, there's no right decision to be made. If you've ever seen my videos on other games like Celeste or Grease, then you'll know there's a soft spot in my heart for emotional games. And it's crazy to think it all started here. I've yet to play the second one, but I will be covering it on the channel right after I cover Super Mario Sunshine. So if you want to hear my take on that, make sure you subscribe. And in the meantime, what did you think about The Last of Us? Do you have a different take on the ending? And don't spoil the second game. I will find you.